Essential questions to ask before writing test automation. Let's look at the questions you must ask yourself before starting to write test automation. A. How stable is the tested piece of software? B. What are the frequency and length of manual executions of the candidate for automation? C. What is the priority of the test case to be automated? D. How much longer will that task be around? E. How hard will it be to write test automation? A. How stable is the tested piece of software? We've already seen that test automation can be written only against stable software, otherwise maintenance will bite us every single release. B. What are the frequency and length of manual executions of the candidate for automation? Even if a piece of software is stable, it doesn't always make sense to write test automation for it. For example, if we don't need to execute some task, for example, test case number 1, frequently, for example, every release, and the manual execution takes a short time, for example, 10 minutes, then it doesn't make sense to spend 1 week of expensive test automation labor to automate that task. C. What is the priority of the test case to be automated? Test automation is expensive. It doesn't make much sense to invest in the automation of a test case that has a low priority. For example, a test case with low meaning in terms of company business. D. How much longer will that task be around? If some feature is going to be removed from your software or deprecated, it makes no sense to write test automation for it. E. How hard will it be to write test automation? Sometimes even trivial manual tasks can turn into a test automation engineer's nightmare. This is especially the case when UI is overloaded with scripting, for example, JavaScript or Ajax. Okay, let's proceed. After the candidate for test automation is carefully chosen, the next steps are to carefully design and write test automation itself. Designing and writing test automation. The scale of test automation projects can vary substantially. In some cases, we can spend 30 minutes to create an automation helper. For example, create account.py. In other cases, we can spend months writing test automation infrastructure, but in any case, test automation programmers should always keep in mind the 3 E's. A. Ease of maintenance. B. Ease of expansion. C. Ease of code reuse. A. Ease of maintenance refers to how much time should be spent updating the test automation in the case of changes in the tested software. Always remember that even the most stable component can be modified dramatically. Let's look at an example of a bad test automation practice. Example, let's assume that we have 3 helper scripts. Automate task1.py was written by Joe. Automate task2.py was written by John. Automate task3.py was written by Jason. Each of these 3 tools has account creation as the first thing to do. So Joe, John, and Jason each wrote his own function to create an account. On one happy Friday, ShareLane programmer Billy adds a new column to the DB table user's age. The age column must be populated during account creation because otherwise the account will be considered non-active. As a consequence, all 3 helper scripts must be modified to comply with that change in the tested software. Does it look like Joe, John, and Jason have been thinking about maintenance? Probably not. By the way, the solution to this particular problem is to create the function createAccount and place it into the module QAlib.py, where we put functions used by test automation. In order to create a new account, Joe, John, and Jason will simply need to import the function createAccount from QAlib.py into their scripts. This way, in the case of a change in the tested software, for example, a new column in the DB, the test automation should be changed in only one place, QAlib.py. You have to build your test automation around the idea that tested software is going to change. When you are doing test automation programming, constantly ask yourself how easy it will be to modify that test automation if the tested software is changed. As we have already discussed, maintenance is the biggest concern with test automation. Example: here is a good analogy about the relationship between tested software and test automation. A teacher asks children to make a little sculpture of humans. The process is simple. First, they would use metal wire to create a body, and then they would wrap something around it. So, if a child used clay as a wrapper, after the clay hardened, we cannot change the body position. For example, make a sculpture of a standing person instead of a sitting person without breaking the clay. But if a child used plasticine that doesn't harden, that plasticine would easily and naturally change its shape as child changes the body position. The moral here is that your test automation must be like plasticine. The test automation must be designed to allow easy and painless modification if the tested software is modified. Example: in the case of the script test discounts, it's really easy to change the test automation if the product manager decides to change the logic between the number of books and discounts. We just have to spend 1 minute to modify the file with the expected results, testdiscounts.er.txt. Note that we don't need to modify the Python code, testdiscounts.py, at all. Another interesting fact here is that while designing testdiscounts.py, we expected that the most probable change that could happen to function getDiscount would be a change in the logic between the number of books and the discount rates. So we designed testdiscounts.py to make it easy to update it in case of a change in the tested software. B. Here is another aspect of this test automation business. How easily can you expand your test automation? Let's say that your test automation does end-to-end regression testing, and one day you identified several extra test cases that can be automated. Let's assume that the necessary functions like create user are already in place. The question is this: how much time should you spend adding new automated test cases to your existing test automation? In other words, how expandable is your test automation? If your test automation is poorly designed, then adding new test cases can become a real hassle, because every time you might need to investigate how your test automation really works. On the other hand, if adding new automated test cases is turned into a routine, simple task, you can just add new stuff on the fly without wasting your time decrypting the test automation code. In the ideal situation, you would just copy existing automated test cases, change some data in them, and welcome brand new members into your test automation suite. Another aspect of expandability is whether or not it is easy to teach others to expand your test automation. If your test automation is designed and written properly, it should not be a problem to create a tutorial to teach others about expanding it. C. Code reuse is one of the cornerstones of good programming practices. Code reuse means that existing code is used again and again to solve similar tasks. For example, the create user function, which we put into the module qalib.py, can be reused every time the test automation needs to create a new user account. Please remember, 1. If you write your own code, you should always think about how reusable it will be for you and your colleagues. 2. In many cases, there is already code created by other people that you can reuse for your test automation. We can recommend the following things for better code reuse. It's better to create several simple functions than to pack code inside one big complex function or class. Comment your code. Create coding standards and adhere to them. Don't try to get fancy. Simplicity is the key. Always think about those who might want to reuse your code. Code reusability is closely connected to both the maintainability and expandability of test automation. Reusable code is usually well documented, well designed, and clean, so it's easier to maintain. Reusable code is a set of building blocks that can be used for future test automation expansion. Lesson recap. 1. Questions to ask before automating something. A. How stable is the tested piece of software? B. What are the frequency and length of manual executions of this candidate for automation? C. What is the priority of the test case to be automated? D. How much longer will that task be around? E. How hard will it be to write TA? 2. Test automation programmers should always keep in mind the 3 E's. A. Ease of maintenance. B. Ease of expansion. C. Ease of code reuse. 3. You have to build your test automation around the idea that tested software is going to change. 4. The test automation must be designed to allow its easy and painless modification if the tested software is modified. 5. Code reuse means that existing code is used again and again to solve similar tasks.